Victor looked at me with that pitying, fatherly smile, the one rich men use right before they destroy you. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of a crack, and asked if I was holding up okay, under the pressure of being a young widow. He thought I was the same terrified girl who scrubbed his office floors 3 weeks ago. He thought the man sitting quietly beside me in the wheelchair was a senile invalid he could bury, along with the company's secrets. He didn't know that, in exactly 5 minutes, I was going to strip him of his billions, his reputation, and his freedom. I smoothed the skirt of my black dress, forced my lips into a trembling, grateful curve, and lied. "I'm just trying to do what's best for the family," I whispered. Victor patted my shoulder. He had no idea the shark was already in the water. "If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you." 3 weeks ago, my reality wasn't corporate boardrooms or billion-dollar conspiracies. It was gray water swirling in a plastic bucket at 11:30 at night. I pushed the mop across the marble floor of the lobby, the smell of industrial lemon cleaner burning the back of my nose. My lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that I had named the third shift. I had been awake for 19 hours. My morning shift at the diner started at 5. The retail shift at the mall ended at 9. And now I was here, erasing the footprints of people who made more money in a minute than I would see in a lifetime. I paused to wring out the mop, my hands red and chapped, even through the rubber gloves. I stared at my reflection in the darkened glass of the revolving doors. I looked like a ghost. Dark circles under my eyes that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide, hair pulled back in a fraying elastic, a uniform that hung loose on my frame because I'd started skipping lunch to save an extra $5 a day. I moved to the trash can near the elevators to change the liner. As I pulled the bag out, a crumpled piece of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a receipt from a steakhouse down the street. I shouldn't have looked at it. I knew better than to look at the math of the wealthy. But curiosity is a sickness when you're poor. I smoothed it out against my palm. Dinner for 2. $340. I stared at the number. $340. That was my share of the rent. That was 2 weeks of groceries for my dad and Gwen. That was a new pair of shoes for Gwen so she wouldn't have to glue the soles of her sneakers back together with super glue again. Someone had eaten this money. They had chewed it up, swallowed it, and forgotten about it by the time they walked across this lobby. I felt a sudden violent urge to scream. It rose in my chest, hot and acidic. I wanted to throw the mop through the glass. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But I didn't. I couldn't afford to scream. Screaming meant getting fired. Getting fired meant missing the electric bill. Missing the electric bill meant my dad's oxygen concentrator would stop working. So I swallowed the scream. It tasted like bile. I crumpled the receipt and threw it into the fresh liner, burying it deep. I gripped the mop handle until my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to focus on the rhythm. Dip, ring, push, pull. Survival wasn't about anger. Survival was about endurance. I just had to make it to Friday. If I made it to Friday, I got paid. My phone vibrated in my back pocket just as I was locking the supply closet. It was midnight. My stomach dropped. No one calls at midnight with good news. Midnight calls are for accidents, arrests, and death. I pulled the phone out, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of glass over the name Mom. "Hello?" My voice sounded raspy, unused. "Lana?" My mother's voice was high, thin, terrified. "It's Dad. He collapsed. We're at Memorial." The world tilted on its axis. The hallway seemed to stretch out, creating a tunnel vision effect. Is he conscious?" They took him back. They said it's his heart again. "Lana, they're talking about surgery. Please, you need to come." "I'm coming," I said. "I'm leaving right now." I hung up and ran. I didn't clock out. I didn't care. I burst out of the service entrance into the cold night air, the rain immediately soaking through my thin uniform shirt. I sprinted across the parking lot to my car, a 15-year-old sedan that was held together by rust and prayer. I threw myself into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. I turned it. Click, click, click. No, please, not now. Come on, I begged, hitting the steering wheel with the heel of my hand. Please, just start. Just this one time. I turned the key again. The engine groaned, a pathetic dying sound, and then fell silent. The battery, or the starter, or the alternator. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was that I didn't have the money to fix it, and I didn't have a way to get to the hospital. I looked at the dashboard clock, 12:15. The hospital was 5 miles away. I slammed my head back against the headrest, tears hot and stinging in my eyes. I couldn't call a rideshare. I had checked my balance before my shift, $84. A ride right now in the rain would cost $30. That was money I might need for a prescription copay. Okay, I whispered to myself. Okay. I got out of the car. I locked it, though there was nothing inside worth stealing, and I started running. The rain was freezing, slashing against my face like tiny needles. I ran toward the bus stop 3 blocks away, my work shoes splashing through puddles, soaking my socks instantly. I prayed the night bus was running on schedule. I prayed I wouldn't be mugged standing on the corner of 4th and Main at midnight. I stood under the flickering streetlight, hugging my arms around myself, shivering violently. Every minute felt like an hour. Every pair of headlights that swept past made me jump. I imagined my father in a hospital bed, wires and tubes hooked up to him, his face pale and gray. I imagined Gwen sitting in the waiting room, scared and small. When the bus finally hissed to a stop, I fumbled with my change, my fingers numb and clumsy. I dropped a quarter, and the driver, a man with tired eyes, just sighed and waved me back. "Just go sit down, kid," he mumbled. I collapsed into a plastic seat near the back, water dripping from my hair onto the floor, and stared out the window at the blurred city lights, trying to count my heartbeats to stop from hyperventilating. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. My mother was sitting in a corner chair, twisting a tissue into shreds. Gwen was asleep with her head on Mom's shoulder, looking too young to be dealing with this much tragedy. I rushed over, my wet sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. "Mom?" She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "He's stable. Dr. Hayes is in with him now." "What happened?" He stood up to get a glass of water and he just went down, Lana. He turned blue." Before I could answer, the double doors swung open. A tall man in a white coat walked out. Dr. Hayes. He had silver hair and the kind of calm, detached expression that doctors wear when they deliver bad news 50 times a day. I stood up, my knees trembling. "Dr. Hayes? How is he?" He stopped in front of us, looking at his clipboard. "Miss Miller, your father has suffered a severe valve failure. We've stabilized him for the moment, but his heart is working at less than 20% capacity. He needs a valve replacement immediately, within 48 hours. "Okay," I said, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Okay, so let's do the surgery. Schedule it." Dr. Hayes didn't write anything down. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "We've run your father's insurance, Lana. The policy you have, it's catastrophic coverage only. It doesn't cover this specific procedure because they're classifying his condition as pre-existing due to the hypertension diagnosis 3 years ago." The room went quiet. I felt a cold buzzing in my ears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the insurance denied the claim. The hospital requires a deposit to book the OR and secure the prosthetic valve." "How much?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "The total estimated cost is roughly $200,000, Dr. Hayes said. He said it casually, like he was telling me the price of a used car. "We need 50% upfront to proceed." $200,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I physically recoiled, taking a step back as if he had slapped me. 200,000, I repeated. I don't have that. We don't have that. I understand, Dr. Hayes said, but without the surgery, the prognosis is very poor. Perhaps 3 months, maybe less. 3 months. I looked at my mother. She had gone pale, her hand covering her mouth. I looked at Gwen, who was stirring, waking up to a nightmare. There has to be a payment plan, I pleaded. I work 3 jobs. I can pay you monthly. I'll sign whatever you want. I'm afraid the administration doesn't allow payment plans for elective surgeries of this magnitude without a significant down payment, Dr. Hayes said. He sounded bored. I'll give you some time to discuss your options. He turned and walked away, his white coat flapping behind him. I stood there, frozen. Options? What options? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I stared at the screen. Available balance, 84/12. I did the math in my head. If I saved every single penny I earned, didn't pay rent, didn't eat, didn't pay for electricity, it would take me 6 years to save $100,000. My father had 48 hours. I sank into a plastic chair, put my head in my hands, and felt the crushing weight of the world pressing down on my spine. We were going to lose him, not because medicine couldn't save him, but because I was too poor to buy his life. I sat there for an hour. I watched the clock on the wall tick, tick, tick. Each second was a piece of my father's life slipping away. At 2 a.m, the waiting room was empty except for us, or so I thought. Miss Miller? I looked up. A man was standing next to the vending machine. He looked completely out of place. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, polished leather shoes that gleamed under the harsh lights, and he was holding a leather briefcase. He didn't look tired. He looked alert, predatory. Yes, I said, wiping my eyes. He walked over and sat in the empty chair next to me. He didn't sit too close, but close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, sandalwood, and money. My name is Wallace, Arthur Wallace. I represent a private client. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling, I said, turning away. My father is dying. I know, Wallace said. His voice was smooth, deep, and terrifyingly calm. I know about the valve failure. I know about the insurance denial. I know Dr. Hayes asked for $100,000 by tomorrow morning. I whipped my head around to face him. How do you know that? Who are you? I'm a problem solver, Wallace said. He placed the briefcase on his lap but didn't open it. And you have a very expensive problem. It's a tragedy, really. You're a good daughter, Lana. You work yourself to the bone. 3 jobs? That's admirable. But let's be honest. Admiration doesn't pay for cardiac surgery. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you a loan shark? Wallace laughed softly. It wasn't a nice laugh. No, nothing so crude. I'm offering a business arrangement. My client, Mr. Thomas Blackwood, is looking for an employee, a very specific kind of employee. I don't have time for a job interview. This isn't a job you interview for. It's a role you accept. He leaned in slightly. Mr. Blackwood needs a wife. I blinked. Excuse me? For legal reasons involving his estate, Mr. Blackwood must be married within the next 3 days. It is a temporary arrangement, 1 year, strictly contractual. No intimacy required. In exchange, he paused, letting the silence stretch. In exchange, you will receive a stipend of $500,000, and my client will cover all immediate medical expenses for your family, including the surgery your father needs tomorrow. My heart hammered against my ribs. $500,000. It was a lifeline thrown into a storm. But I knew enough about the world to know that lifelines usually came with hooks. Why me? I asked. Why not just hire a model or anyone? Mr. Blackwood values discretion and loyalty above beauty, Wallace said, though his eyes did a quick, dismissive sweep of my wet uniform. We looked for someone who was desperate enough to agree quickly, but moral enough to honor a contract. You fit the profile perfectly. Desperate, I repeated bitterly. Practical, he corrected. He stood up and handed me a card. It was thick, heavy cardstock. The offer expires at 8 a.m. If you agree, your father's surgery is paid for by noon. If not, well, I'm sure you'll find a way to comfort your mother. He walked away without looking back. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I went back to our tiny 2-bedroom apartment to shower and change. The apartment smelled like stale grease and mildew. We couldn't afford to run the AC, so the air was thick and heavy. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom I shared with Gwen. She was curled up in her bed, clutching a worn-out stuffed bear she'd had since she was 5. She was 15 now, but in her sleep she looked like a baby. If Dad died, what would happen to her? Mom couldn't work with her bad hip. It would be just me. I would drown trying to keep us afloat, and Gwen would sink with me. She'd never go to college. She'd end up just like me, scrubbing floors at midnight. I walked into the kitchen and opened my laptop. It was 7 years old, the fan whirring loudly as it struggled to boot up. I sat at the chipped Formica table and started searching for loans. Personal loan, emergency medical loan, high-risk lender. I filled out 5 applications in 20 minutes. Denied, denied, denied. Credit score insufficient. Debt-to-income ratio too high. The screen glared at me, mocking me. I had maxed out my credit cards buying groceries 2 months ago. My credit score was in the trash. I was a financial leper. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 4:30 a.m. I thought about Wallace. I thought about the way he looked at me like I was a piece of furniture he was appraising. Mr. Blackwood needs a wife. It sounded like the setup to a horror movie. Who pays $500,000 for a fake wife? A criminal? A monster? But then I thought about Dr. Hayes. 3 months. Maybe less. I closed my eyes and pictured my father's face. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike. He was the one who held me when I cried over my first breakup. He was the only person in the world who looked at me and saw potential instead of failure. I couldn't let him die. Not over money. I would sell a year of my life. I would sell my soul if I had to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Wallace's card. My hand was shaking. I dialed the number. The diner Wallace chose for the meeting was on the other side of town, a quiet place with high booths and no customers. He was already there when I arrived at 7 a.m., drinking black coffee and reading a newspaper. I slid into the booth opposite him. I was wearing my only nice outfit, a pair of black slacks and a button-down shirt I used for interviews. I felt ridiculous. "You're early," Wallace said, folding the paper. "I assume this means yes." "I have conditions," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Wallace raised an eyebrow. "You're not really in a position to negotiate, Miss Miller." "I want the payment for the surgery confirmed before I sign anything. Direct transfer to the hospital." "Done. It's already queued." He pushed a thick stack of papers across the table. "This is the prenuptial agreement and the employment contract. You're signing both." I looked at the stack. It was terrifyingly thick. What am I agreeing to? "Total silence," Wallace said. "You will not discuss the marriage with anyone. Not your friends, not your co-workers. You will tell your family it's a whirlwind romance. You met a wealthy man, you fell in love, you eloped. They won't believe that. I scrub floors. People believe what they want to believe, especially when checks start clearing. You will live in the Blackwood estate. You will have limited contact with the outside world. No social media. No visitors without prior approval. And Mr. Blackwood? I asked. What is he like? Wallace's expression tightened. Mr. Blackwood is secluded. He is an elderly man with significant health issues. He values his privacy. You will find him difficult, perhaps. But you aren't being paid to enjoy his company. You are being paid to wear a ring and exist in his house. I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold against my skin. I looked at the signature line. Lana Miller. If I signed this, Lana Miller ceased to exist for a year. I would become Mrs. Blackwood. I would belong to a stranger. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Mom. "Dad is asking for you. He's scared." That was it. The fear in my chest hardened into something cold and solid. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Wallace smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just bought a racehorse for the price of a donkey. He flipped to the last page and pointed a manicured finger at the bottom line. I pressed the pen to the paper. My hand trembled just once, and then I wrote my name. "Excellent," Wallace said, pulling the papers back immediately. He tapped his phone screen. "The transfer to Memorial Hospital has just been authorized. Your father will be prepped for surgery within the hour." I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Wallace said, his eyes cold. "Go pack a bag, Mrs. Blackwood. The car will pick you up at noon. Don't be late." The car Wallace sent was a black town car with tinted windows so dark I couldn't see out, and no one could see in. It felt less like a luxury ride and more like a prison transfer. We drove for 40 minutes, leaving the city grid behind for the winding, tree-lined roads of the Heights. I had never been to the Heights. It was a place where the driveways were longer than my entire street, and the security cameras outnumbered the residents. When the car finally slowed, we were facing a set of wrought iron gates that looked like they belonged to a fortress. They swung open silently. We drove up a gravel path that crunched loudly under the tires, announcing my arrival to whatever waited inside. The mansion was massive. It was a sprawling gray stone beast that loomed against the overcast sky. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a mausoleum. There were no flowers, no garden gnomes, no signs of life. Just manicured hedges cut into sharp, geometric shapes, and windows that stared back like dead eyes. The car stopped. The driver didn't get out to open my door. I fumbled for the handle, my palms sweating, and stepped out onto the gravel. The front door opened before I even reached the steps. A man stood there. He was tall, thin, and wore a suit that looked older than I was. He had a face made of sharp angles and zero warmth. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a label. "I'm Lana," I said, gripping the strap of my duffel bag, the only luggage I owned. "Just Lana." "I am Henderson," he said, ignoring my correction completely. "I manage the household. Mr. Wallace has informed me of the arrangement. You will follow me." He turned and walked into the dark hallway. I hesitated on the threshold. This was it, the point of no return. If I walked in there, I was admitting that I was property. I was admitting that my name, my future, and my body were commodities I had traded for a heart valve. I thought about the text I had sent my mom 10 minutes ago. I met someone. He's amazing. We're going away for a while. Don't worry about the money. I took care of it. Lies. All of it. I took a breath that tasted like rain and cold stone, and I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound like a vault ceiling. The air inside was 10 degrees cooler than outside. The foyer was cavernous, with a chandelier that probably cost more than my entire education hanging threateningly overhead. "Your room is in the east wing," Henderson said, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "Mr. Blackwood's quarters are in the west wing. You are not to enter the west wing without an invitation. Is that clear?" "Crystal," I muttered. "Dinner is served at 7 sharp. Mr. Blackwood values punctuality. Do not be late." He didn't offer to take my bag. He just marched up the grand staircase, expecting me to follow like a stray dog he'd been forced to adopt. Henderson led me to a parlor on the ground floor an hour later. "He is ready for you," was all he said before vanishing into the shadows. The room was dim. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sun. The only light came from a fireplace that crackled softly, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, facing the fire, was a wheelchair. I walked forward slowly, my sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor. I felt ridiculous in my cheap clothes, surrounded by oil paintings and antique furniture. "Mr. Blackwood?" I whispered. The chair turned slowly. The electric motor whirred. I had braced myself for an old man. I had expected wrinkles, liver spots, maybe an oxygen tube. But I wasn't ready for the mask. He was wearing a smooth white porcelain mask that covered the upper half of his face. It was featureless and eerie, like something from a tragic opera. Below the mask, his jaw was covered in a thick, graying beard. He wore gloves on his hands, and a heavy blanket was draped over his legs. "Come closer," he said. His voice was a ruin. It was raspy, wet, and weak, like he was dragging every word through gravel and glass. I took 2 steps forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mr. Wallace said, "He said you needed help." "Wallace talks too much," the man wheezed. He lifted a gloved hand and gestured vaguely at a chair opposite him. "Sit, please." I sat on the edge of the velvet armchair, keeping my back rigid. "Why the mask?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Wallace didn't mention a mask." "Burns," he rasped. "Chemical fire. Years ago. It scares the staff. I prefer modesty." I felt a pang of guilt. I was judging a man who had clearly been through hell. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stare." "You are young," he observed. The eyes behind the mask were dark, hidden in shadow. I couldn't read them. "Younger than I expected. Wallace said you were desperate. You don't look desperate. You look tired." "I'm both," I said. "My father is in surgery right now because of you. So, yes, I'm here." He nodded slowly. "A transaction. Clean. Simple. I like that." He leaned back, his head lolling slightly as if the effort of holding it up was too much. "You understand the terms? 1 year. You live here. We appear in public occasionally to prove the union is valid. Then you leave with your money." "And the reason?" I asked. "Why do you need a wife so badly that you'd buy one?" He was silent for a long moment. The fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney. "My brother," he said finally, the venom in his voice clear even through the rasp. "Victor. He wants my company. He wants my legacy. But my father's will had stipulations. If I die unmarried, Victor gets everything. If I leave a widow, the trust protects the assets." "So I'm a shield," I said. "You are a wall," he corrected. "A wall between a lifetime of work and a vulture who wants to pick the carcass clean." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made my own chest ache. "Thank you, Lana, for saving what matters." Toxic benevolence. He was thanking me for selling my freedom so he could win a posthumous pissing contest with his brother. "I'm doing it for my dad," I said flatly. "Not for your legacy." "Motives don't matter," Thomas Blackwood whispered. "Only results." The wedding happened 2 hours later in the same dim parlor. It was the bleakest event of my life. There were no flowers, no music, no white dress. I wore the same black slacks and button-down I had worn to meet Wallace. Thomas stayed in his wheelchair, the blanket pulled up to his chest. The judge was a short, sweaty man named Judge Prenter, who looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. He mumbled through the service, skipping the preamble and going straight to the legal necessities. "Do you, Thomas Edward Blackwood, take this woman?" "I do," Thomas rasped. "And do you, Lana Marie Miller?" I hesitated. The room was silent. Henderson was standing in the corner, watching like a prison warden. Wallace was there, checking his watch. I thought about the hospital. Dr. Hayes said the surgery would take 6 hours. Right now, at this exact second, someone was cutting my father's chest open. They were stopping his heart. They were relying on a machine to keep him alive while they stitched a new valve in place. And the only reason that machine was running was because I was standing in this room. "Lana," Wallace prompted, his voice sharp. "I do," I said. The words tasted like ash. "Sign here," the judge said, shoving a clipboard at me. I signed. Thomas signed with a shaky, gloved hand, the pen barely staying in his grip. "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife," the judge muttered. He stamped the paper. Thump. It sounded like a gavel sentencing me to prison. "Congratulations," Wallace said, not smiling. He picked up the papers and slid them into his briefcase. "The first installment of your stipend has been initiated, $50,000. The rest comes at the end of the year." Thomas didn't look at me. He just turned his wheelchair around. "I am tired," he announced to the room. "Harrison, take me to my quarters." "Good night, husband," I said, testing the word. It felt alien. He paused. He didn't turn back. "Good night, Lana." And then he was gone. I was left standing in the parlor with a gold ring on my finger that was heavy enough to sink a ship, married to a stranger in a mask. I went to my room. It was huge, with a 4-poster bed and a window that looked out over the dark grounds. I sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled out my phone. I had 5 missed calls from Mom. I dialed her back immediately. "Mom, is he out? Is he okay?" "Lana!" She was crying. "They haven't started. They stopped the prep." The blood drained from my face. "What? Why?" "The billing department came in. They said there was a problem with the transfer. They said the funds were flagged." "Flagged?" I stood up, pacing the room. "No, that's impossible." Wallace said it was done. "They're holding him in pre-op, Lana. They won't wheel him in until it clears. He's scared. He's asking why we have to wait." "Put the nurse on," I snapped. "Or the billing coordinator. Anyone. Hold on." There was a rustling sound, and then a woman's voice, clipped and annoyed. "This is Mary in billing." "This is Lana Miller. Why isn't my father in surgery?" "Ms. Miller, the wire transfer from the holding company." "Blackwood Holdings, LLC. It triggered a fraud alert with our bank. It's a large sum from a corporate account paying for a private individual. Until the bank verifies the source, we can't accept the funds." "Verify it then," I shouted. "Call the bank." "It's 5:30, Ms. Miller. The banks are closed. We might have to wait until tomorrow morning." "He doesn't have until tomorrow morning," I screamed. I felt hysteria clawing at my throat. "You have the confirmation number. You have the money pending. If he dies because you're waiting for a bank teller to stamp a piece of paper, I will sue this hospital into the ground. Ma'am, shouting won't help." I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I needed Wallace. I needed to find him. I ran to the door of my room and threw it open. Henderson was standing in the hallway polishing a side table. He didn't even look up. "Where is Wallace?" I demanded. "Mr. Wallace has left for the evening," Henderson said calmly. "Call him back. There's a problem with the money." "Mr. Wallace is in transit. He does not take calls while driving." "My father is dying." Henderson looked at me then. His eyes were flat. "Mr. Wallace is a very competent lawyer, Mrs. Blackwood. If he sent the money, it will arrive. Banks are bureaucratic. Patience is a virtue." "I don't have patience." I tried to push past him to go find a landline, maybe the office, maybe Thomas. Henderson stepped in front of me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a wall. "Mr. Blackwood is resting. He is not to be disturbed with domestic trivialities. If you persist in creating a disturbance, I will have to sedate you for your own well-being." I froze. Sedate me? He meant it. I could see it in his eyes. I was in a house in the middle of nowhere, with people who viewed me as an asset, not a person. If I made too much noise, they would silence me. I backed away slowly. "Fine," I whispered. "Fine." I went back into my room and locked the door. I grabbed my phone and dialed the hospital billing department again. I spent the next 4 hours on hold, being transferred from supervisor to supervisor, using every ounce of rage and desperation I had to bully them into accepting a provisional approval code I found in the email Wallace had forwarded me earlier. Finally, at 9:45 p.m., the nurse came back on the line. "Okay, Ms. Miller, the override went through." They're taking him back now. I collapsed onto the floor, the phone slipping from my sweaty grip. I had fought the bank, the hospital, and the panic, and I had won. But I was exhausted. I curled up on the expensive rug and cried until my throat was raw. I woke up at 2 a.m. I was still on the rug. The house was silent. I needed water. My throat felt like sandpaper. I unlocked my door quietly and peered into the hallway. It was empty. The sconces on the walls were dimmed to a low, amber glow. I walked toward the stairs, my socks sliding on the polished wood. I was halfway to the kitchen when I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Footsteps. I froze, pressing myself into the shadow of a large vase. The sounds were coming from the floor above me, the west wing. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the slow, shuffling gait of an elderly man. It wasn't the whir of an electric wheelchair. These were heavy, confident strides, fast. Someone was running or pacing aggressively. I held my breath. Was it Henderson? No, Henderson moved like a ghost. These steps were heavy, angry. Could Thomas walk? Wallace had said he was an invalid. He had been in that chair all day. His legs had looked atrophied under the blanket. Maybe it was a nurse? A night shift caretaker I hadn't met? The footsteps stopped abruptly. Then, a loud crash. It sounded like glass shattering against a wall. "Damn it!" a voice yelled. It was muffled by the floors and walls, but it was a man's voice. It didn't sound raspy. It didn't sound weak. It sounded strong, frustrated, and young. I stood there, my heart pounding in my ears. Paranoia whispered to me, "Who is up there?" "Mrs. Blackwood?" I jumped, nearly knocking over the vase. Henderson was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He was wearing a silk dressing gown, looking unbothered. I heard a noise. I stammered. A crash. "Mr. Blackwood has night terrors," Henderson said smoothly. "He often knocks things over in his sleep. It is distressing, but normal for his condition." "He was walking," I whispered. I heard footsteps. "The old plumbing rattles," Henderson said, "pipes expanding and contracting. It sounds like footsteps to the uninitiated. Go back to bed, madam. There's nothing for you to do here." He watched me until I turned around and walked back to my room. I locked the door again and pushed a heavy armchair in front of it. Pipes didn't yell, "Damn it." 2 days passed. My father's surgery was successful. He was in ICU but stable. I had spoken to Mom briefly, keeping up the lie about my amazing new husband who was whisking me away to Europe, explaining why I couldn't visit. The guilt was a physical weight in my gut, but at least Dad was alive. Dinner on the third night was a formal affair. I was summoned to the dining room at 7:00 p.m. Thomas was at the head of the table in his wheelchair, still wearing the mask and gloves. I sat to his right. The table was long enough to seat 20 people, so the distance between us felt like a canyon. Henderson served the meal, some kind of roast duck with fig sauce. It was delicious, but I had no appetite. "How are you settling in?" Thomas asked. His voice was raspy again, the weak, wheezing sound I remembered from our first meeting. "Fine," I said, pushing a fig around my plate. "The house is quiet." "Quiet is a luxury," he said. "The world is too loud." "I heard you the other night," I said, watching him closely. "You dropped something." He paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. "Ah, yes, my clumsiness. The neuropathy in my hands. Sometimes I lose my grip. It is humiliating." "Henderson said you have night terrors." "Henderson is protective," Thomas said. "But yes, the fire, the memories. They visit me at night." He reached for his water goblet. It was a heavy crystal glass, slick with condensation. As his gloved fingers grazed it, his hand spasmed. He knocked the goblet hard. It tipped over the edge of the table, falling toward the hardwood floor. In that split second, the sick, old man vanished. His hand shot out. It was a blur of motion, too fast for me to track. He caught the goblet by the stem inches before it hit the floor, snapping it upright in mid-air with the reflexes of a fighter pilot. Not a drop of water spilled. I stared at him. My fork clattered onto my plate. Thomas froze. He held the glass there for a second, his hand steady as a rock. Then he seemed to realize what he had done. He slowly, shakily placed the glass back on the table. He let out a groaned wheeze and rubbed his shoulder. Adrenaline, he rasped, his voice sounding forced. Strange. What the body can do in a panic. I looked at his hand. It wasn't shaking anymore. Right, I said slowly. Adrenaline. My heart was racing. I looked at the mask. I looked at the dark eyes watching me from the shadows. That wasn't adrenaline. That was muscle memory. That was youth. The man sitting next to me wasn't a cripple. He was a liar, and I was locked in a house with him. I needed to know. The suspicion was like a splinter in my brain, festering and hot. It wasn't just the footsteps or the reflex catch. It was the way the house felt, staged, like a movie set where the walls were cardboard and the actors were reading off cue cards. I waited until 2 in the afternoon. I had tracked Henderson's schedule for the last 2 days. At 2 o'clock, a delivery van arrived from a specialty grocer in the city. Henderson always went out to the driveway to inspect the produce personally. He was meticulous, annoying, and predictable. That gave me exactly 12 minutes. I stood by the window in the parlor and watched the white van pull up. As soon as Henderson stepped out the front door, I moved. I ran to the West Wing corridor. The double doors were mahogany, polished to a mirror shine, and formidable. I tried the handle. Locked. Obviously. I pulled a bobby pin from my hair. I had seen people pick locks in movies 1,000 times. You just wiggle it, right? I jammed the metal pin into the keyhole and twisted. Nothing happened. I twisted harder, sweat pricking at my hairline. "Come on," I hissed. The metal bent, digging into my thumb. It was useless. The mechanism was solid brass and probably 100 years old. I wasn't getting in this way. I checked my watch. 4 minutes gone. I looked down the hall. At the far end, there was a service door that led to the wraparound terrace. I had been out there yesterday to smoke a cigarette I'd hidden in my sock. The terrace connected the entire back of the house. I ran for the service door. It opened. A gust of wind hit me, blowing hair into my face. I stepped out onto the stone patio. To my left was the east wing. To my right, the west wing. The windows there were tall, draped in heavy curtains. I ran to the nearest west wing window. I pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands to block the glare. I couldn't see anything through the velvet. I tried to slide the window up. It didn't budge, painted shut or locked from the inside. "Damn it," I whispered. My heart was thumping an erratic rhythm against my ribs. If Henderson caught me out here, peeping into the master's bedroom, what would he do? Lock me in my room? Drug me? I tried the next window. Locked. I was running out of time. I could hear the delivery van's engine idling in the driveway around the corner. It would be leaving any second. I reached the last set of French doors at the far end of the terrace. These looked different. The handle was slightly turned, not fully vertical. I gripped the cold metal and pulled. The door stuck for a second, the weather stripping, clinging to the frame, and then it popped open with a groan that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. I froze, waiting for alarms, for shouting, for dogs. Nothing. Just the wind. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The room smelled wrong. That was the first thing that hit me. It didn't smell like camphor, old paper, or sickness. It smelled like sandalwood, ozone, and pizza? I stood still, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. It was a bedroom, massive and messy. Not eccentric billionaire messy. College dorm messy. There were clothes thrown over a chair, jeans, a gray hoodie, a pair of Nike running shoes that looked brand new. I walked further in, my footsteps silent on the thick Persian rug. On the nightstand, there wasn't a CPAP machine or a lineup of pill bottles. There was a gaming controller, a half-empty bottle of Gatorade. a stack of files labeled Project Lazarus. I felt a wave of dizziness. This wasn't Thomas Blackwood's room. This was a stranger's room. I moved to the bathroom door, which was ajar. The vanity light was on. I walked in and stared at the counter. It looked like the backstage of a theater. There were jars of spirit gum, bottles of acetone, and several containers of foundation mixed to a sickly, pale gray tone. And there, sitting on a styrofoam head in the corner, was the beard. It was a masterpiece of prosthetic work. Hand-tied hairs, modeled skin texture, designed to adhere to a jawline and cover it completely. Next to it was the white porcelain mask. I reached out and touched the mask. It was cold. I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. I was married to a fraud. I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing downstairs. Henderson was back. Then the sound of the wheelchair motor. It was coming down the hall, toward this room. I should have hidden. I should have climbed back out the window, run to my room, and pretended I knew nothing while I planned my escape. That would have been the smart thing to do, the survivalist thing to do. But I was done surviving. I was done being the scared little girl who cleaned floors and said thank you for scraps. The anger that had been simmering in my gut since the hospital waiting room boiled over. It was hot and blinding. I grabbed the porcelain mask off the stand. I walked back into the bedroom and stood in the center of the rug, facing the main door. The handle turned. The door swung open. Thomas rolled in. He was slumped in the chair, the blanket over his legs, his head down. He looked pathetic. He looked like a dying man. He didn't see me at first. He reached up with a gloved hand to rub his neck, letting out a long, weary sigh that wasn't raspy at all. It was just a normal, tired sigh. "Welcome home," I said. My voice was ice. His head snapped up. The motion was sharp, instantaneous. He saw me standing there. He saw the mask in my hand. For a second, nobody moved. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. Then, he did something I didn't expect. He didn't panic. He didn't scream for Henderson. He just stopped slumping. His spine straightened. He sat up, and suddenly he looked 3 inches taller. He reached up and peeled the gray, patchy wig off his head, tossing it onto the bed. Underneath, his hair was thick and dark. "Well," he said. His voice was deep, clear, and resonant. "I guess we can skip the charade for tonight." "Who are you?" I demanded, gripping the mask so hard I thought it might crack. "Because you sure as hell aren't Thomas Blackwood." "Actually, I am," he said, casually unbuckling the straps of the wheelchair. "I'm Thomas Daniel Blackwood, but everyone calls me David. Thomas was my grandfather." He kicked the blanket off his legs. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt underneath the robe. He stood up. He walked toward me, fully, easily, powerfully. I took a step back, my back hitting the dresser. "You're a liar. You're a con artist." "And you're a very snoopy house guest," he countered, crossing his arms. He wasn't intimidated. He looked annoyed. "Do you have any idea how expensive that prosthetic was? Put it down before you break it." I threw the mask at him. He caught it. Of course he did. Reflexes. "You lied to me," I screamed. "You lied about everything. My father, the surgery. Did you lie about that too? Is the money even real?" "The money is real," David said calmly, placing the mask on the bed. "Your father is alive because of me. Let's not forget that part of the equation, Lana." "Don't you dare," I spat. "Don't you dare act like you did me a favor. You bought me. You tricked me into marrying—" "Who? A ghost?" "I bought your cooperation," he corrected, "and I tricked you into saving this company." "Sit down, Lana. You look like you're going to pass out." I didn't sit. I stood my ground, trembling with rage. "Explain, now, or I walk out that door and I go straight to the police." David let out a dry laugh. "The police? And tell them what?" that you voluntarily married a man you'd never met for $500,000. You think they'll pity you? They'll laugh at you. Or worse, they'll charge you as an accomplice to fraud. The word hit me like a physical blow. Accomplice. I didn't know, I whispered. Ignorance isn't a legal defense, David said. He walked over to the mini fridge and pulled out a water bottle. He cracked the seal. But you deserve the truth. You've earned that much. He took a long drink, his Adam's apple bobbing. My grandfather, the real Thomas Blackwood, died 2 years ago. Heart attack. Instant. 2 years. I stared at him. But the company, the public appearances, all me or Henderson. We managed. David leaned against the desk. See, my grandfather was a genius, but he was also paranoid. He knew his brother, my Uncle Victor, was waiting for him to die. Victor has been trying to hostile take over this family for decades. He's a shark. If he gets control, he strips the assets, fires 5,000 employees, and sells the pieces to foreign investors. He destroys everything. So you pretended he was alive? I had to. Grandfather's will had a trust clause. Control of the voting shares passes to the next of kin, me, only when I turn 27. Until then, if Thomas dies, the board appoints an interim CEO, and the board is in Victor's pocket. How old are you? I asked. 26, David said. I turned 27 in 3 months. 3 months, I repeated. So you just had to keep the corpse walking for 3 more months. Exactly. But then Victor started getting suspicious. He started digging. He found a loophole. The trust stipulates that if the primary beneficiary is incapacitated or absent, the spouse holds the proxy vote. But Thomas didn't have a spouse, I realized. Right. So I needed one. A wife for Thomas Blackwood. A warm body to stand next to the wheelchair and look devoted so that when the inevitable happens and Thomas dies next week... Next week? That was the plan, David said. Thomas passes away peacefully in his sleep. His grieving widow, you, inherits the proxy vote for the 3-month gap until I turn 27. You vote for me as CEO. I take control. Victor loses. You get your money and disappear. It was a clockwork mechanism, a perfect soulless machine, and I was just a cog. You used me, I said, my voice shaking. You used my father's heart failure as a timeline for your corporate coup. I used the resources I had, David said, his eyes hard, and you got what you wanted. Your father is fixed. Your debts are gone. We both win, Lana. Stop looking at me like I'm a monster. I'm leaving, I said. The words just came out. I turned toward the door. I'm done. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to be a part of your lie. You can't leave, David said. He didn't move to stop me. He didn't have to. His voice stopped me. Watch me. Read your contract, Lana. The one you signed without a lawyer. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. Clause 14, Section B, David recited, sounding bored. In the event of voluntary termination of the agreement by the employee prior to the 12-month term, all disbursed funds are subject to immediate clawback, including third-party vendor payments. I turned back to look at him. You wouldn't. I would, he said. If you walk out that door, I recall the wire transfer to the hospital. I cancel the stipend. I sue you for breach of contract. You'll be bankrupt by tomorrow morning. Your father's post-op care? Gone. His medication? Gone. You'll be back mopping floors, but this time with a 6-figure debt hanging over your head. I stared at him. He looked young, handsome, and completely heartless. You're blackmailing me. I'm enforcing a contract, he said. I'm not the villain here, Lana. Victor is the villain. If he wins, thousands of families lose their income. I am protecting them. I am the good guy. You just have to play your part. I hate you, I whispered. That's fine, David said. I don't need you to like me. I need you to be Mrs. Blackwood. Can you do that? Or do I need to call the hospital billing department? I thought about my dad. I thought about the color returning to his cheeks when I saw him on FaceTime yesterday. I thought about the relief in my mother's voice. I let go of the doorknob. "You're a son of a bitch," I said. "I know," David said. "It runs in the family." I sat down on the edge of the bed. My legs wouldn't hold me up anymore. David watched me for a moment, then walked over to a sidebar hidden in a bookshelf. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He walked over and held one out to me. "What is it?" I asked suspiciously. "Whiskey. Single malt. You look like you need it." I took the glass. My hand brushed his. His skin was warm. Real. Not a glove. I took a sip. It burned all the way down, but it settled the shaking in my hands. "So," I said, staring into the glass. "What now? I just pretend I don't know?" "Basically," David said. He sat in the wheelchair again, but he sat slouching, legs spread, relaxed. "Henderson knows, obviously. Wallace knew. Now you know. The circle is small." "Does Wallace know you threatened to bankrupt me?" "Wallace wrote the clause," David said dryly. He was very thorough. He swirled his drink. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. He rubbed his eyes with his free hand, and he looked exhausted. Not the fake exhaustion of the old man act, but the deep, bone-weary tiredness of someone who has been carrying a lie for 2 years. "Is it hard?" I asked, pretending to be him. David looked at the mask on the bed. "It's hell," he admitted softly. "I have to talk like him, think like him. Sometimes I forget who I am. I wake up and for a second I think I'm 80 years old and dying. Then I remember I'm 26 and I just want to go for a run." "But you can't," I said, "because Thomas is crippled." "I haven't left this property in daylight in 18 months, he said. He looked at me, his green eyes intense. "You think you're trapped, Lana. I'm in a prison of my own making. At least you get to leave in a year." I looked around the room, the blackout curtains, the makeup, the loneliness. He was right. He was a prisoner, too, a rich, manipulative, arrogant prisoner. "We're both stuck," I said. "Yes," David said. He raised his glass slightly. "To survival." I hesitated. I didn't want to toast him. I wanted to punch him. But I also understood him, in a twisted way. We were both doing terrible things for family. I clinked my glass against his. To survival. We drank in silence, 2 liars in a gilded cage, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The intercom buzzed at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the silence of the breakfast room. Henderson answered it, his face going pale. He turned to David, who was fully dressed in the Thomas prosthetic, mask and all. "It is your uncle, sir. He's at the gate." David stiffened. I saw his hand, the real one underneath the glove, clench into a fist. "He didn't call. He never just drops by." "What do we do?" I asked, my pulse spiking. "Do I hide?" "No," David rasped, slipping into character instantly. "You are my wife. You belong here. Pour me more tea. Look devoted." Henderson let him in. 10 minutes later, Victor Blackwood walked into the room. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a silver fox in a $3,000 suit, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, cold, calculating, and sharp. "Thomas," Victor said, his voice smooth as silk. "And this must be the blushing bride." He walked over to me and handed me the flowers. I had to take them. I had to smile. "Hello," I said. "I'm Lana." "Lana, lovely," Victor said. He looked me up and down, not in a sexual way, but like he was appraising a used car he intended to scrap. "My condolences, my dear." "Condolences?" I asked. "For what?" "For the situation," he said, gesturing vaguely at David in the wheelchair. "It must be difficult. A young, vibrant woman like you, tethered to a sick room. It's a noble sacrifice. Toxic benevolence. He was insulting me, my marriage, and David all at once, but he packaged it as sympathy. I love my husband, I lied, moving to stand behind the wheelchair, placing a hand on David's shoulder. I felt the tension in his muscles. It's not a sacrifice. Of course, Victor said, taking a seat without being asked. But one worries. Thomas is fragile, and you are new to our world. I just wanted to offer my support. If you ever need anything, guidance, legal advice, a way out, you know where to find me. I am not dead yet, Victor, David wheezed, his voice modulator adding a perfect rattle to the words. Not yet, Victor agreed cheerfully. But we must be realistic, brother. The company needs leadership, stability, not this. Victor stayed for an hour. He drank our coffee and ate our pastries while dissecting our lives with surgical precision. He asked about the wedding. Quaint. My background. Humble. How refreshing. And my family. I understand your father had a health scare recently, Victor said, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. My stomach twisted. Yes, he needed surgery. Heart valve, wasn't it? Victor asked. I froze. I hadn't told him that. Wallace hadn't told him that. How did you know? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, I have friends on the board at Memorial Hospital, Victor said dismissively. And I know Dr. Hayes, excellent surgeon. I've played golf with him for years. In fact, I believe I recommended him for the chief of cardiology position. He smiled at me. I'm so glad he could help your family. It's a small world, isn't it? 1 minute you're drowning in medical debt, and the next you're marrying a billionaire who solves all your problems. Fortuitous timing. He let the silence hang there. He knew. He wasn't just making conversation. He was telling me that he knew exactly how this deal was made. He was telling me he knew I was bought. Yes, I said, my throat dry. Very fortuitous. Well, Victor said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, I should run. I have a lunch meeting with Hayes, actually. I'll pass on your gratitude. He walked out, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken threats in the air. As soon as the front door closed, David ripped the mask off. He was sweating. He suspects, David said. He knows the timeline is too convenient. But I wasn't listening to David. My mind was reeling. Lunch with Hayes. Victor Blackwood played golf with my father's doctor. Victor Blackwood recommended him. It wasn't a coincidence. Rich people didn't have coincidences. They had plans. I'm going out, I said, grabbing my purse. David looked up from his wheelchair. Where? You can't just leave. Victor might be watching the house. I have to go to the pharmacy, I lied. For feminine things. Unless you want to send Henderson? David grimaced. Fine. Take the SUV. Stay off the main roads. Be back in an hour. I didn't go to the pharmacy. I drove straight to Dr. Hayes' private practice office in the city. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, paranoid that every black car was Victor. I couldn't ask David for help with this. David thought he was the puppet master. But what if he was being played too? What if the price of my father's surgery wasn't just bad luck? $200,000. The number that had ruined my life. The number that had forced me into this house. Why was it so high? Why was the insurance denied so quickly? I needed to see the files, not the digital ones. I didn't know how to hack a server. I needed the paper trail. Doctors always kept paper. I parked 3 blocks away and walked to the medical center. I pulled my hair back, put on a pair of old glasses I found in the glove box, and tried to look invisible. I walked into the waiting room. It was empty except for the receptionist, a woman with reading glasses and a headset. Can I help you? She asked, not looking up. Hi, I said, pitching my voice higher. I'm here to pay a bill for my father, Robert Miller. I think there was a mistake on the invoice. I need to see the itemized breakdown. It's mailed to you, she droned. I moved, I said. I never got it. Please, it's urgent. She sighed, annoyed, and turned to her computer. Name? Robert Miller. While she typed, my eyes scanned the desk. There it was, a thick, leather-bound planner. Dr. Hayes, 2024 schedule. It was right there, just out of reach. "I'm not seeing a balance due," the receptionist said, frowning at the screen. "It says, paid in full by third party." "Right, but I need the itemized list for tax purposes," I improvised. "Can you print it?" "The printer is in the back," she grumbled. She stood up. "Wait here." As soon as she disappeared around the corner, I lunged. I didn't have time to be subtle. I grabbed the leather planner. I flipped it open to the dates around my father's collapse, 3 weeks ago. My finger traced the lines. Monday, golf, VB. Tuesday, lunch, VB, VB, Victor Blackwood. I flipped to the notes section at the back. It was a mess of scribbles, but one line jumped out at me because it had my last name. Miller case. Protocol B initiated. Insurance override denied per VB request. Markup 400%. Wait for desperation. I felt like I was going to vomit. Wait for desperation. They didn't just overcharge us. They blocked the insurance. They created the crisis. Victor knew David needed a wife, so Victor created a candidate. He targeted a desperate family, squeezed them until they broke, and served me up on a silver platter to his nephew, knowing I would be the weak link he could exploit later. I heard the printer whirring in the back. The receptionist was coming back. I pulled my phone out and snapped a blurry photo of the page. I slammed the book shut and shoved it back onto the desk just as she walked out. "Here," she said, handing me a paper. "Thanks," I choked out. "Thank you so much." I ran out of the office. I made it to my car before I broke down. I locked the doors and slumped over the steering wheel, hyperventilating. Wait for desperation. My father almost died. He spent 2 days in agony, his heart failing because Victor Blackwood wanted to play a game of chess with his nephew. And Dr. Hayes, the man I trusted, the man I thanked, was in on it. I looked at the photo on my phone. It was grainy, but the words were legible. Protocol B. This proved conspiracy. This proved fraud. But it also proved that Victor was watching us long before the wedding. He knew everything. I realized something else. If Victor had engineered this, he wasn't done. He expected me to be his pawn. He expected me to turn on David when the pressure got too high. And if I didn't, if I sided with David, then I became a liability. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gwen. "Hey, are you picking me up? You said you'd be here at 3. I looked at the clock, 2:45 p.m. Gwen was at school, alone, vulnerable. If Victor was willing to almost kill my father to get what he wanted, what would he do to my little sister? "Oh, God," I whispered. I started the car. I peeled out of the spot, ignoring the stop sign. I had to get to her. I had to get her safe. I drove like a maniac. I ran 2 yellow lights and cut off a delivery truck. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. At first, it was just traffic. But then I noticed it. A dark gray sedan, plain, unmarked. It had been behind me since the medical center. I took a sharp right turn, way too fast. Tires squealed. The gray sedan turned right. I took 3 lefts, circling the block. The sedan followed. "No, no, no," I chanted, gripping the wheel until my knuckles hurt. "Not today, not her." I pulled up to the high school loading zone. Gwen was standing there with her backpack, looking at her phone. She looked so normal, so innocent. I threw the passenger door open without putting the car in park. "Get in, now!" Gwen looked up, startled. "Lana, what's wrong?" "Get in the car, Gwen," I screamed. She scrambled in, terrified by my tone. "Okay, I'm in." I slammed on the gas. The car lurched forward. "Put your seatbelt on," I ordered. "Lana, you're scaring me. What is happening? Mom said you were in Europe." "Mom is wrong. I'm here, and we have a problem." I looked in the mirror. The gray sedan was still there. It had pulled out of traffic and was accelerating. It was closing the gap. "Who is that?" Gwen asked, turning around. "Don't look at them," I snapped. "Hold on." I swerved into the oncoming lane to pass a bus, ignoring the honking horns. The gray sedan followed, matching my move. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. They were chasing us. My phone rang. It was connected to the car's Bluetooth. Unknown number. I answered it. "Who is this?" "Mrs. Blackwood," a distorted voice said. "Pull over. We just want to talk." "Go to hell," I said. "Pull over or we run you off the road. We know your sister is in the car. Protocol C is in effect." I hung up. "Lana," Gwen was crying now. "Who was that?" "Nobody," I said, my voice shaking. "Call David." "Who is David?" "My husband. Look in my contacts. Call Thomas. Put it on speaker." She fumbled with the phone. It rang once. "Lana," David's voice. "Where the hell are you?" "They're chasing me," I yelled. "Gray sedan, 2 men. They know I went to Hayes' office. They have Gwen." "Where are you?" David's voice changed. The rasp was gone. He was barking orders. "Give me your location." "Heading north on I-95 near the industrial park." "Listen to me. Do not stop. Do not go home. Go to the old warehouse district. Dock 4. I'm sending security. Can you make it 5 miles? I looked in the mirror. The sedan bumped my bumper. The car jolted. Gwen screamed. "I don't know," I yelled. "They're hitting us." "Drive, Lana," David roared. "Just drive." The impact wasn't like the movies. There was no explosion, no slow-motion glass shattering, just a sickening crunch of metal as the gray sedan clipped my rear bumper, sending my car spinning across 3 lanes of traffic. I screamed. Gwen screamed. The world became a blur of gray sky and concrete barriers. We slammed into the guardrail, the airbags deployed with the force of a punch to the face, hot, white, and suffocating. Dust filled the cabin instantly. "Gwen!" I clawed at the deflated bag, coughing. "Gwen!" "I'm okay," she sobbed from the passenger seat. "I'm okay." I kicked my door open. We were at the entrance to the industrial park. The gray sedan had stopped 50 yards back. 2 men were getting out. They wore heavy coats and held things that definitely weren't cell phones. "Run!" I gasped, grabbing Gwen's arm. "Run toward the warehouses." We scrambled over the barrier, sliding down a muddy embankment. My ribs felt like they were cracked. My knees were bleeding. "There!" I pointed to Dock 4. A large corrugated metal door was rolling up. A black SUV screeched around the corner, placing itself between us and the men on the highway. 4 men in tactical gear jumped out, weapons drawn. They weren't police. They were private military. "Mrs. Blackwood!" one of them shouted. "Inside, now!" We sprinted into the dark maw of the warehouse. The metal door rattled shut behind us, sealing out the daylight and the danger. Inside, it was a cavern of shadows. Crates were stacked to the ceiling. In the center, under a single hanging bulb, was David. He was still in his wheelchair, but he had ripped the armrests off in frustration. When he saw us, he stood up, forgetting the act entirely. "Lana," he breathed. He looked at Gwen. "Is she hurt?" "We're alive," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "They ran us off the road. They tried to kill us." I collapsed onto a crate. The adrenaline was leaving my system, replaced by a cold, shaking terror. I looked at my little sister. She was huddled against a forklift, staring at David, a man she thought was 80 years old, now standing tall and young in a t-shirt and jeans. "He's not old," Gwen whispered. "You lied." "We all lied," I said. "I'm sorry, Gwen. I'm so sorry." "We need to call Wallace," I said, once my breathing slowed. "This isn't fraud anymore. This is attempted murder. We need the police. We need legal protection." David looked at Henderson, who was standing by a folding table set up with laptops. Henderson's face was grave. "We cannot call Mr. Wallace," Henderson said softly. "Why not?" I demanded. "He set this up. It's his job to fix it." "Mr. Wallace was found dead in his apartment an hour ago," Henderson said. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. Dust motes danced in the light of the single bulb. "Dead?" I repeated. "How?" "Police are calling it a suicide," David said, his voice flat, angry. "A gunshot wound, but Wallace was left-handed. The gun was in his right hand." I felt the blood drain from my face. Victor. He's cleaning house, David said. Wallace knew too much. He was the weak link. Now he's gone. And I'm next, I realized aloud. I'm the wife. I'm the one with the evidence. I pulled my phone out. The screen was cracked, but the photo of the planner was still there. I have proof, David. I went to Hayes' office. Victor and Hayes planned this. They inflated my dad's surgery costs to force me into the marriage. David took the phone. He stared at the image of the appointment book. His jaw tightened until I thought his teeth would crack. He set you up, David murmured. He didn't just wait for an opportunity. He manufactured one. He tortured your family to get to me. He looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The distance was gone. I am going to destroy him, David said. Not for the company, for this. Sir, Henderson interrupted. I've accessed Mr. Wallace's cloud backup. He had a dead man switch protocol, a file just decrypted. We gathered around the laptop. Henderson clicked play. A video window opened. It was Wallace sitting in his office. He looked disheveled, sweaty. He kept glancing at the door. If you're watching this, I've lost, Wallace said on the screen. Victor has threatened my daughters. I had no choice. I helped him engineer the liquidity crisis for the Miller family. I drafted the NDA to be breakable. The plan is for Thomas to die next week. I gasped. Victor has swapped Thomas's heart medication, Wallace continued. The next dose will induce cardiac arrest. It will look natural. Once Thomas is dead, Victor plans to expose Lana as a fraud. He'll claim she manipulated a senile old man. He'll use the fake medical history to prove she was desperate for money. She goes to prison. Victor gets the company. The video ended. I stared at the black screen. He was going to kill you, I whispered to David, and frame me for it. He still is, David said. The board meeting is tomorrow morning at 9. If I don't show up, they vote to remove Thomas for incapacity. Victor takes over, and once he has control, we're just loose ends. We have the video, Gwen said, speaking up for the first time. We have the photo, just email it to them. Victor controls the servers, David said. Any email we send gets quarantined. He owns the security team at the building. We can't get in. We don't need to get in through the front door, I said, a memory flashing in my mind. The smell of lemon cleaner, the heavy gray bucket. What? David asked. I work there, I said. I mop those floors. I know how the cleaning crews get in. I know the freight elevator codes. I looked at David. We're going to crash that meeting, but we have to do it my way. We didn't sleep. We spent the night in the warehouse building our case. Henderson used a portable printer to blow up the photos of the ledger. David rehearsed his speech. I sat with Gwen explaining everything, the money, the contract, the lies. You did it for Dad, Gwen said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I did it for us, I said, and now I have to finish it. At 4 a.m., David wheeled over to me. He looked terrified. If this goes wrong, he said quietly, Victor's men will be waiting. They have guns, Lana. This isn't a board game. I know, I said. I transferred the rest of your money, he said, to an offshore account Victor can't touch. If we get separated, take Gwen and run. I'm not running, I said. I reached out and took his hand, his real hand. I'm Mrs. Blackwood. I have a contract to fulfill. He squeezed my hand. You're terrifying. I learned from the best. Getting into the building was the easy part. The night cleaning crew let us in the loading dock because I knew the supervisor, Maria. She didn't ask questions when I showed up in a janitor's uniform with 2 new hires, pushing a large trash cart. We rode the freight elevator to the 40th floor. The cart smelled like garbage, which was perfect because it hid David, who was crouched inside it. We parked the cart in the utility closet just down the hall from the boardroom. It's time, David whispered. He climbed out of the cart. He put the mask on. He sat in the wheelchair we had smuggled up. I put my black dress on over my cleaning uniform. I pushed him down the hall. The security guard at the boardroom door stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood? You can't be here. The meeting is closed." "I have the proxy," I said, holding up the legal pad. "As Thomas's wife, I have a right to be heard." Mr. Victor gave strict orders. "Move," David rasped from the chair. The guard hesitated. He looked at the frail old man, then at me. "Do you really want to physically assault a disabled billionaire in front of a security camera?" I asked, pointing to the lens on the ceiling. He stepped aside. I pushed the doors open. The boardroom was silent. 20 people sat around the glass table. Victor was at the head, standing mid-sentence. "Sadly, my brother's mental decline has reached a critical point. It is with a heavy heart that I move to invoke Article 25. "Objection," I said loudly. Victor froze. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Lana, my dear, you look disheveled. Did you get lost?" "I'm here to vote," I said, pushing the wheelchair to the opposite end of the table. "You have no standing," Victor smiled, "and Thomas is clearly in no state to—" "I'm feeling much better, actually," David said. He stood up. The collective gasp in the room sucked the air out of the space. David unbuckled the mask. He pulled it off and dropped it onto the glass table. It clattered loudly, spinning before settling. He stood there, 26 years old, furious, and very much alive. "Hello, Uncle," David said. His voice was strong. "Did you miss me?" Victor's face went gray. This is an imposter. Security." "Sit down, Victor," David commanded. "Henderson, play the video." Henderson, who had walked in behind us, plugged a flash drive into the main projector. Wallace's face filled the wall-size screen. The board members watched in silence as the dead lawyer confessed to the conspiracy. They watched him detail the medical fraud, the hit ordered on David, the threats. Then I stepped forward. I slapped the file onto the table. And here is the schedule from Dr. Hayes' office, proving Victor orchestrated the medical crisis that forced me to marry his nephew. I looked at the board members. He tried to kill my father. He killed Mr. Wallace. And yesterday he tried to run my 14-year-old sister off I-95. Victor was shaking. "These are lies, deep fakes. This girl is a gold digger. She seduced him." "Toxic benevolence to the end, huh?" I said. "You're done, Victor." David pressed a button on the intercom. "Officers, you can come in now." The side doors opened. 4 uniformed police officers walked in, followed by a detective I recognized from the news. "Victor Blackwood," the detective said, "we have a warrant for your arrest for the murder of Arthur Wallace and conspiracy to commit fraud." Victor looked at the window, then at the door. For a second, I thought he might run, but he just slumped. The air went out of him. "I did it for the company," he muttered as they cuffed him. "He's just a boy. He'll ruin it." "I might," David said, watching them drag his uncle away, "but I'll do it honestly." The room was silent again. The board members stared at David. "Well," David said, sitting in the chairman's chair, "let's call this meeting to order. First item of business. I need a divorce lawyer." He looked at me and winked. "My dad is walking 3 miles a day now. His heart is ticking like a Swiss watch. He doesn't know the full story. He just thinks Thomas was an eccentric who valued privacy and that we annulled the marriage because of irreconcilable lifestyle differences, which is technically true. Gwen is back in school, though she refuses to get into a car unless I'm driving. We're working on it. I moved out of the mansion the day after the board meeting. I took my money, all $500,000 of it, and paid off the medical bills, the student loans, and bought a small house with a yard. No marble floors, no butlers. I kept the job at the cafe, though, just for the mornings. It keeps me grounded. Yesterday, a customer walked in just as I was wiping down the counter. He was wearing a hoodie and running shoes, looking like a normal 20-something guy except for the piercing green eyes. David ordered a black coffee. He didn't have security with him. "You know," he said, leaning on the counter, "I'm looking for a new head of operations for the charitable foundation. Someone who knows how to handle budgets and isn't afraid to yell at billionaires. I'm retired from the corporate world, I said, handing him his cup. It pays well, he said. And the boss is trying to be a better person. Is he? I asked. He's working on it. He's learning the hard way. I looked at him. He looked tired but happy, real. I'll think about it, I said. Take your time, David smiled. He left a $100 tip on a $3 coffee and walked out. I watched him go. I haven't called him yet, but I kept the cup. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.